Welcome to EPG Pathashala. My name is Dugirala Vasanta. I am on the teaching faculty of the Department of Linguistics at Osmania University, Hyderabad. This is course 10, Psychoneurolinguistics, module 20 of Neurolinguistics. The topic is Modularity versus Connectionism. In the previous module, you have learned that linguistic representations are not static entities stored in particular areas of the brain. They are deployed differently during language processing depending upon their complexity as well as task demands. In this lecture, I will discuss one of the most important debates in neurolinguistics. It is about modularity versus connectionism. Basically, the idea of modularity goes with mentalism and nativism, about which you learnt in the psycholinguistics modules right at the beginning. In classical cognitive science and the innateness hypothesis advanced by Chomsky, generative linguists like Chomsky, mind is modular, meaning that symbolic mental representations and linguistic rules interact during language learning and processing, and this happens in specific modules. That's what modularity is. That there are linguistic representations, there are rules, the rules act on the representations, some competition takes place, and all this is happening in a specialized language module which may have sub-modules, phonological module, syntactic module, semantic module. So, this is what is modularity. This idea called modularity dominated psycholinguistics, neurolinguistics, developmental psychology, neuropsychology until mid-90s maybe. It's a major idea that mind is modular. What is the evidence for modularity? They say that mind must be modular because how else do we explain that children learning a language world over, they all follow the same milestones. Every child first babbles and then goes through another stage of one word, two word. So the milestones in language development more or less fixed. So across all cultures. So this is an evidence that language learning takes place similarly across everywhere because there is a special module. Our ability to parse quickly sentences with ambiguity, it's not that we are perplexed. If we hear somebody say, the flying planes can be dangerous, there are two meanings which are supposed to come to our mind. But we don't get confused. We pick up various clues and understand the meaning of the sentence as it is required to, as it is appropriate to the context. So, we are able to parse sentences, disambiguate sentences quickly. We can't do this if there is no special module. Then there is brain damage. How do you explain aphasic patients who falter in speech production but have no problem understanding? If there is no speech production module, how do you explain this? In Broca's aphasia, probably that module is affected and that's why he can't speak, but he can understand. On the other hand, in Wernicke's aphasia, the patient cannot understand but can speak. So, this brain damage can affect language functions independently because they are independent modules. Right? Then they also cite something called language gene. There is a genetic component in a disorder called specific language impairment. So, these are some of the evidences cited in favor of modularity. One of the modularists, very well known modularist, is Jerry Fodor. He argued that knowledge about words, they never influence our perception of phonemes. There are a whole lot of psycholinguistic experiments involving phoneme monitoring and things like that. What he is saying is higher level representations do not interfere with lower level representations because they are separate modules. There is a morphology module somewhere, there is a phonology module somewhere. So, in other words, top-down processing does not interact with bottom-up processing. The initial stages of word or a sentence comprehension are not affected by knowledge representations from higher levels. So, when we are processing words or sentences, we are not really bringing our word knowledge. Alright, this is what the modularists are saying. But after initial, first we go through symbol manipulations and linguistic processing, linguistic symbols only. We deal with linguistic symbols. After initial linguistic processing in specialized modules, information about context or other factors from outside world may play some role. That's all. Otherwise, mind is modular, language processing is modular. This is modularism. Opposing this view is connectionism. Connectionism is saying it is based on learning theories, behaviorism, associationism, neural networks. Alright. So, connectionists question the long held assumption about mental computations are basically symbol manipulations, linguistic symbol manipulations. Generative linguists say that there is an underlying form and there are certain rules which work on that form to give rise to surface form. So, in other words, the computation that happens in the brain involves operations on symbols, linguistic symbols, but connectionists are questioning that. Connectionists question the long held notion that mental computation happens on linguistic symbols, that linguistic symbols are manipulated in the computation, in the brain involves symbol manipulation, and that there are rules, there are representations. Connectionists say that they are saying that connectionists posit connections like synapses in the nervous system with interacting levels of information processing. They also say that feedback from the environment, is involved in learning. So, modularity is, but the term modularity has different meanings in different disciplines. So, we need to look more closely at how the term is used in different disciplines. We've been talking about modularity, but the notion of module itself is dealt with differently in different disciplines. So, let's look at some examples. In anatomy, for instance, module is a specific structure. In the field of design, it is assembly of structures. This is also true in vision research. In the field of developmental psychology, module is end product of development. It is captured by the notion called neuroconstructivism. In the field of evolutionary biology, module is a result of natural selection. Quite a bit of information about this is given in the e-text. So, please go back to the e-text to learn more about the notion of module, types of modules, etc. I will now talk about the characteristics of Fodorian modularity, Jerry Fodor's idea of how to define modules within linguistics. A module, according to Fodor, is characterized by domain specificity, mandatoriness, limited central access, speed, information encapsulation, fixed neural architecture, specific breakdown patterns, specific ontogeny. Let's say what is the evidence they quote in support of modularity in the vision domain. You may have heard, especially in psychology books, something called Muller-Lyer illusion. On the screen you see two lines, vertical lines. However much, even when we know that both vertical lines are about the same length, when we stare at it, we feel the left line is larger than the right line, the left side one, alright. We perceive it like that. This is an illusion actually. It's because, our brain works in a modular way. Knowledge given to you is also, you're able to overcome that knowledge. You cannot make use of that knowledge from the way you perceive. Okay, visual perception is also modular. Okay, so but what about, okay, that is in the vision area and the processing of some lines. What about language? What is modularity in language? Here we have to say Chomskyan linguists have been saying that language is a special module because it has little to do with general intelligence. You don't have to be extremely intelligent to be able to learn and use language. It requires limited, if any, stimulation from the environment. Because there is a phonology module, we cannot stop from hearing and processing sounds. You can't switch off. You have to process what comes to your ears. Because there is a module, it picks it up and processes it. Language is functionally independent of memory and problem solving and other general cognitive capacities. The very existence of Broca's aphasia and the very existence of Wernicke's aphasia means that there are separate modules for production and separate module for comprehension. That's why one module is affected, you get Broca's production problem, other module is affected, you have comprehension problems. So this is some of the argument in favor of modularity. Let's now switch to connectionism and see how connectionism developed. In the 1940s, the computer scientists and linguists came together. So it is marked, the decade of 40s is marked by coming together of these disciplines. By 60s, artificial neural networks were developed. By 70s, development of symbolic models. By the decade of 80s, what are known as PDP models, that is parallel distributed processing models were designed. By 90s, ideas like neurocomputing, emergentism, dynamic systems came up. So it is not possible for me in this lecture to give more details about these developments. So let's look at some important features of connectionism. Connectionism says memory doesn't reside in any single neural element or linguistic representation. Memory is represented by pattern of activation over several nodes or neurons. You can read node as a neuron. So memory is spread over. The activity of each node neuron might be either excitatory or inhibitory depending upon the weights of the connection. Some connections are very strong, some connections are weak. The strong ones are excitatory, the weak ones are inhibitory. Depending upon the strength of these connections, information flows and you interpret. The weight is either positive or negative, varies between -1 to +1 and specifies the strength or importance of the connections between any two units or nodes. In connectionism, computations within a connectionist system, those computations, they don't transform symbols, okay, and they don't involve rules. Modularism talks about representations and rules. Connectionism doesn't involve symbols and rules. According to connectionists, learning takes place through strengthening and weakening of interconnections in response to examples encountered in the input. Alright? So learning consists of a network of units that enable the learner to produce rule-like behavior, but the rules themselves exist only as association strengths distributed across a huge network. Connectionists are saying, how can we defend modularity, especially in language, if there are actually linguistic representations like phonemes and syllables and words? How do you explain if you take a word like softly? In natural, when you speak English naturally, you don't pronounce the t. You don't say softly. You don't say like that. You say softly. The t is really not there. But if it is swiftly, the t is slightly. So what do you mean by the representation of t in softly and representation of t in swiftly? Why is there a difference? How do you explain that if there is a module? Words such as memory can be pronounced as memory or memory. Are there 2 syllables or 3 syllables? So the point that they are trying to raise is that it's fuzzy. You can't say you can count the syllables in every word clearly. Alright? A word like prefabricate is compositional. You can say prefabricate. Then when you come across predict or prefer, what happens? You are not going to say prefer, predict. You don't do that. Then you can't divide and combine. Whereas prefabricate you can combine. So how can you talk about representations being static, stored in one part? Okay. The questions of grammatical or ungrammatical also applies to sentences according to Modularis, but the borderline between grammatical and ungrammatical is very often ignored. There are some fuzzy cases. The picture you see on the screen is a typical connectionist network. You see there are input units. In some books you might come across nodes, input, hidden units and output nodes, and they are all connected. There are multiple connections connecting all these nodes. This network promotes parallel processing of information. No question of, in modular theories, information flows from one module to the next module, whereas here connectionism argues for information can be top down or bottom up, or it's multiple information processing take place, and hidden units are inserted into this module to account for the way we generalize. After learning something, we always generalize. So hidden units take care of that. Once again, I request you to go back to the e-text to learn more about this. So Mattingly and Lieberman in 1988, they are modularists. They said speech perception must be counted as a distinct module of auditory system because, as experiments have shown, it doesn't depend upon the outputs of other modules. Under appropriate conditions, a coherent speech percept is evoked by information in two signals that are perceived as separate sources. Moreover, one of the signal is simultaneously perceived as non-speech and speech. Speech perception is thoroughly precognitive and is part of larger specialization for language. So this is a typical modularist view about speech perception. There is the notion of dual perception. You would have learned in psycholinguistics modules, go back and read that. But this is how modularists describe speech perception. On the other hand, in Kuhl, a person who is endorsing connectionism, in 2006 says like this: the mechanism underlying speech perception are domain general. When we say domain general, it means it's part of general cognition. Speech perception is part of general cognition. It relies on processing that is not exclusive to speech signals. Language has evolved to capitalize on general mechanisms of perception and action, and this ensures that all infants, regardless of culture in which they are born, they respond to and learn from exposure to language. As experience with language ensures neural commitment to certain properties of the language to which infants are exposed, results in dedicated neural networks, which you might want to call it a module. In other words, you don't start with modules. You get information from the environment. The entire general cognition is involved in speech perception. But as you learn a particular language, then maybe a dedicated network in the brain is involved in speech perception and it becomes specialized. Okay, this is a connectionist view. And so this brings me to the summary of this unit on modularity versus connectionism. So to summarize the main points of this module, I have pointed out that mentalism and nativism associated with generative linguistics, basically they drew upon modular models. Modularism goes with nativism and mentalism. What is the argument in support of modular models, modularity? It is about that children world over, they follow the same milestones in learning language, and because we are born with this innate module, language module. Also, in when the language breaks down, how is it that patients experience problem only in production or only in comprehension? You can justify that only if there are separate modules involved in speech production and speech comprehension and things like that. The other example in support of modularism that I just pointed out was in this lecture, that our ability to detect ambiguity in ambiguous sentences, parse sentences quickly, all this is possible only if we believe in innateness, and we are endowed with innately specified specialized language module. They also point out, like speech perception for instance, during speech perception we don't draw upon higher level representations, is what modularists have argued. But the connectionists on the other hand have questioned the fundamental assumptions of modularism. Connectionism says that you don't need to deal with fixed representations and rules acting on those representations. Connectionists believe in free flow of information from top down, and bottom up information is all the time recruited together. It's not one way, as modularists have pointed out. Connectionists basically say there is intricate interaction among representations, and that learning also takes place when there is feedback from the environment. So that is another feature of connectionism. Connectionists have said that speech perception definitely benefits from general cognitive abilities like attention and memory and things like that, which is ignored by modularists. So these are some of the major differences in connectionism versus modularity, which is a major debate in neurolinguistics, and I hope I was able to point out the major differences between the two concepts. If you have any doubts, do consult the e-text and additional readings mentioned in the e-text. Thank you.